These days, it's uncommon to see politicians on both sides of the aisle agree on an issue. But lately, both Democrats and Republicans seem to be united against one common enemy: TikTok. The popular social media app has around 150 million active users in the U.S. That's almost half of all Americans who use it to watch content, create videos, and more. But despite its widespread popularity, Congress is now pushing to ban the site because of widespread privacy and security concerns. Because TikTok was created by a Chinese company, some experts worry that large swaths of collected user data could fall into the wrong hands.
Far from just viewing videos on apps like TikTok, interacting with the platform and downloading TikTok on your phone can give it an enormous amount of access to your other activity on your phone, including potentially your email activity, or including accessing data and text messages or location services in other ways beyond just your interactions with the app. But even on the app, we're talking about information on your likes, your dislikes, your wants. These companies build sophisticated user profiles, and there's a concern that with these profiles in the hands of the Chinese Communist Party, it will be much easier to target individual users with propaganda and information.
That's Lindsay Gorman, a senior fellow for emerging technologies at the German Marshall Fund's Alliance for Securing Democracy. Gorman points out that TikTok, along with many other social media sites, has created algorithms that constantly analyze what you search, view, and do online. With this information, companies are able to create sophisticated user profiles that are then used to sell targeted advertising.
The concern, particularly with TikTok, is that the Chinese government could say, we don't want Americans seeing content about, say, Taiwan, or about Chinese political leaders, or about freedom and democracy and Chinese activists that maybe have emigrated and moved to the United States. And they could tweak the algorithm so that even subtly, without us knowing, the content that the Chinese Communist Party wants us to see gets upranked, and the content they don't want us to see gets downranked.
And TikTok is far from the only social media app to use these tactics. The reason it's being targeted by Congress is because it's owned by ByteDance, a Chinese tech company that has connections to the Communist Chinese government. While this issue is a matter of national security, shouldn't personal security matter too? The reality is that many Americans are uncomfortable with the mining of their data. So why doesn't the government do more? One expert weighing in is Timothy Edgar, a former national security and intelligence official and a professor of the practice of computer science at Brown University. Edgar highlights that many politicians in D.C. believe that data collection by American companies is fair practice.
Members of Congress look at them also as American companies and American innovators. And so there's a little balance there. When it comes to the CEO of TikTok, they really kind of just let it loose and said, look, we just don't trust your company. The chairman of the committee just outright said, I want to ban TikTok. That's it. We need to get rid of you guys. So that's not the kind of thing that we heard even when Mark Zuckerberg and other tech executives were on the hot seat. You didn't hear people saying, we need to ban Facebook or we need to ban Twitter or YouTube.
Speaking of Facebook, they've had their own issues, yet Congress has largely turned a blind eye. Just last year, the company paid a $650 million settlement to users in Illinois after they illegally stored facial recognition data. But believe it or not, this kind of far-reaching data collection happens all the time.
It's called surveillance capitalism. You give up your private data. In exchange, advertisers get access to an audience that's going to buy their products, and everybody kind of understands that. They may not understand the level of information at which they're collecting. They're collecting down to very, very granular level of information. And not only, what videos you watch, but how long you watch them, when you click on them. All of that can reveal information about you, about your interests, but also about things like your income or where you're located that are of serious interest to these advertisers.
And it's more than just advertisers who are buying these detailed profiles.
There have also been examples in all the social media world about selling that information to political campaigns or other people or companies that have a strong interest in that kind of information. And there's a robust market. Some of that market is kind of in the dark market of hacked information, but some of it's very legal. But that legal market is not necessarily transparent to the consumers.
This practice may seem harmless, but it does put consumers at risk. In some cases, the data falls into the wrong hands, and people are defrauded, hacked, or fall victim to identity theft. In rare occurrences, private messages or photos are used as online blackmail. This sitting data is also at risk of being hacked and misused by other nations.
We know that Russia has sought to interfere in US elections, including by accessing information on voter rolls and attempting to access data on American voters so that they could target them with propaganda. That's the kind of national security risk that we're really talking about and we're worried about, because we know that our democratic system is essential to our society and our security.
With so many negative consequences stemming from data collection, you're probably wondering, how can I protect myself? The easy answer would be to delete all social media apps, but we know this isn't realistic advice. Instead, there are ways to use these platforms without fully compromising your personal information. The catch is, the apps intentionally make this process difficult.
Right now, it's very, very difficult to stop data flows on your phone for the individual. I've personally tried to do what I can, and I'm not even sure I've gotten it all. It's really tough. But I think the best thing to do beyond not downloading some of these on your phone at all, particularly with TikTok, is when you have an option to opt out of data sharing of location services, choose to opt out. A lot of times, companies don't make it easy for you to opt out, and you actually have to go into really detailed in the settings to try to find ways to opt out of the sharing of data.
Gorman also recommends avoiding apps made in autocratic countries like China or Russia. While these tips slightly move the needle, both Gorman and Edgar believe that U.S. politicians need to step up and better protect citizens.
The government absolutely needs to pass comprehensive federal privacy legislation yesterday. We're finally getting calls from both Democratic and Republican lawmakers to make that happen. And some of these privacy protections exist at the state level, but they're just not enough. We need the government to say to what extent companies can access data without the user knowing and without the user's consent. And I think that consent piece will be a really big part of any legislation that gets passed, that we need to know beforehand when our data is going to be used and how. And there's really strong models for this type of legislation in Europe. The General Data Protection Regulation that the EU has passed a few years ago and is implementing now provides a really solid foundation for some of what we might see in the United States.
On the bright side, President Biden has publicly stated that sweeping legislation on data collection is overdue. His team recently unveiled a new national cybersecurity plan that aims to better protect Americans and hold tech companies more accountable.
One of the things I liked about the national strategy for cybersecurity that the Biden administration put out just a few weeks ago was saying, really we need to shift away from this idea that it's up to the individual only to protect their privacy and security. It really needs to be up to the system. We need to have greater accountability for companies, whether that's through liability or regulation, to set the ground rules here. We can't really expect individuals to be able to make decisions about their individual usage of the internet or social media apps or other things in a way that fully understands exactly what's going to happen to that data down the road. It's just not realistic. And it takes the onus away from where it belongs, which is on the companies who are in a position to either invade our privacy or to do a better job of protecting it.
To find out more about Lindsay Gorman, Timothy Edgar, and all our featured guests, visit viewpointsradio.org. This segment was written and produced by Grace Galanti. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. Studio production by Jason Dickey. I'm Marty Peterson. Coming up next week.
In the last 2 decades, this century, there has been virtually no change in the gender wage gap. Why do women, on average, still make 20% less than men? Then,
they revealed to me that my father had not been my biological father, which is something that I had never remotely thought, known, entertained.
The hidden secrets uncovered from an at-home DNA test. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about upcoming shows and find a library of past programs on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and more information about our guests at viewpointsradio.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Viewpoints.